Welcome to Equilibrium Echoes, the podcast where we delve into the transformative power of your inner world on your relationships. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. Join me as we unlock the secrets of emotional equilibrium and dig deep into the tools and insights needed to foster healthier, more fulfilling relationships in ways that feel safe and authentic. Welcome back to Equilibrium Echoes. I'm your host, Alyssa Decker. We are here in the middle of season 2, and today I'm excited to talk to Risa Ganel, Together Couples Counseling. Risa is joining us today to talk about artificial intimacy, and I think this is a fascinating topic. We touched on this a few episodes back with another guest, and we were discussing how sometimes it's very easy to confuse sexual intimacy for actual emotional intimacy. And so I wanted to bring Risa on to really dig into this a little bit more, because I think this is something we don't always understand. What is intimacy? What is healthy intimacy and connection? What does that look like? How does that get distorted in our relationships, and what can we do about it? So Risa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started doing this counseling and this work that you do.
Sure. So, in some ways, I started my journey as a therapist when I was about 8 years old,
Wow.
because I was the one whose friends always came to me for advice and, to talk about emotional things. And even beyond that, when I was in sleepaway camp in a bunk of 12 girls, out of the 12, my parents were the only ones whose parents were still married. And that just
Wow.
really hit me at the age of 12. And so I think the seeds were planted then for me to become a couples therapist. And so I studied marriage and family therapy and have a master's degree in that. But that was over 30 years ago, so I've been practicing for quite a long time and, have continued my studies over the years to work with some of the top therapists in the country. Esther Perel was my supervisor for a period of time. And more recently, in the last, 8 years or so, I connected with Terry Real, and some of your audience members may know relational life therapy, which is the framework that he developed and that I am certified in and now also train other therapists how to do. So that's a bit of my journey in couples work. And of course, I have a private practice here in the state of Maryland where I live, and I'm licensed to work with couples in Maryland and Virginia. So
Awesome. That is so cool that your journey started as a child. Like, I think that so many of us have these things when we're young that we're like, this is what I want to do. And yet so few of us end up actually living that out. And so I love that you have, and that what kind of developed when you were a child is what you're doing today. I think that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about intimacy. And I would love to start with a definition to make sure we're all coming from the same place. So when we use the word intimacy, what are we talking about? What's the definition of that term?
sure. So the way I define true intimacy is the intersection of truth and love. So if we keep it simple and think about that, it is the ability to be able to speak your own truth from a loving, connected place so that you maintain your own individuality while also maintaining connection with the other person.
And
That's from an emotional perspective, a psychological perspective.
Yeah. And that's a two-way thing, right? to really be in an intimate relationship, that would have to work both directions.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
what are the parameters? Like, how do we define what a healthy intimacy is? I know there's like a whole list of terms and phrases that we use to sort of define what unhealthy intimacy is, like a codependency or various things. But how do we know whether this emotional connection we have with someone is healthy or unhealthy?
Well, every relationship is a dance of movement from harmony to disharmony to repair and back to harmony. That is the stuff of an intimate connection. And we know mostly how to do the harmony part, although we can have counterfeit harmony at times, right?
Yeah.
Pretend harmony. But the other pieces of disharmony and repair in particular, we don't know how to do. We're not taught the skills of how to do it and how to do it effectively, such that we actually return to harmony. And that's a lot of what we all need to learn how to do better. You know, my mentor, Terry Real, says intimacy is not something you have, it's something you do. And we can learn to do it better.
Mm.
And one of the things I say to a lot of my clients is we need to learn how to speak up for ourselves in a way that seeks to maintain the connection with our partner, not destroy it. We need the
Mm.
skills to learn how to do that.
Yes. And that's not easy because like you said, most of us grow up, or many of us anyway, grow up not being given those skills as children. And when we get to this point where we're in an intimate relationship with a partner, that is uncomfortable to have to stop and reassess and learn new skills, isn't it?
Sure. We're used to doing what we're used to doing. It's what we know. It's what's comfortable. It's what our brains do, right? It's what's automatic. And
Right.
that is a key piece of change is shifting from our automatic responses to a new learned response, which feels clunky and awkward and like it's not natural,
Mm-hmm.
right? A lot of my clients will say, yeah, I could do that or we could do that, but it doesn't feel right. No new skill we learn feels easy and comfortable. It's just like riding a bike. You have to sort of figure out, okay, which way do I lean and how do I turn my head and where do I put my foot and where do I put my hand? You have to think about all these things because it's not automatic. And
Right.
so it feels awkward and clunky. And that's true with any emotional new skill we learn as well.
Right. But I think there's also this measure of pride that gets involved. Like, I'm a 40-year-old adult. I should know how to do this. Right. But we
Yes.
don't. Like, and sometimes half the battle is getting to a place where we're willing to acknowledge that we don't have the skill set that we need.
Yes. And I think it's also a cultural, a piece culturally that we live in of I shouldn't have to do this. It should just come naturally. Uh, and I shouldn't have to work so hard at this.
Right. If it's true love, it'll be easy.
That's right. Yeah,
The
not at
biggest
all.
myth ever.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So,
You know,
talk to me. Oh, go ahead.
the one thing I was just going to add is that, you know, another piece of our culture teaches us that conflict doesn't belong in an intimate relationship, that it just shouldn't happen. Um, and the reality is friction is necessary. It's needed. And in order to have a deeply intimate connection, the ability to work through conflict in a way that actually brings you deeper, more connected to the other person, because you hear and understand them more, and they hear and understand you more. It's not the absence of conflict that makes for intimacy. It's the ability to actually move through the friction and come out the
Yes.
other side stronger and more connected.
Right. So that actually ties into my next question, which was about repair. You mentioned that that's one of the key points in this cycle. So is repair the same as making up?
Well, it depends on how you define making up, what that really is to
Well,
you.
I think what I'm getting at is like so often in relationships, we'll do this like surface apology to each other and then we're like, okay, everything's fine, moving on. But I think what's implied by the term repair is something a little bit deeper than that.
I agree. I agree. What you described in the making up, I would put in the category of that's more artificial intimacy, right?
Mm.
That's we've smoothed over the rough edges. We've gone back to things being polite, perhaps kind, but washed over rather than actually addressed, which makes it much more likely that whatever the upset was that occurred, it's much more likely it's going to happen again.
Mm-hmm.
Because repair, on the other hand, includes the mission to truly understand where the distress came from, what contributed to it, what I contributed to it, and what I can do in this moment, as well as in the future, to not cause that same upset, to help
Mm.
you, my partner, feel better.
And that's a
And
lot more than just saying I'm sorry.
that's right. That's right. It's more than saying I'm sorry, and it's more than saying I understand. Like when someone says, "Oh, I understand how you're feeling," it doesn't tell you a darn thing that they understand how you're feeling, right?
Right? Yes. Those are very easy words to say, but they don't, there's no, like you said, there's no communication back of like, I really get what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think at this point in this conversation, it would be good to paint this picture of what does a relationship look like where there's really healthy intimacy? And what does a relationship look like where there's a lot of this artificial intimacy where we're just kind of glossing over everything? Can you paint that contrast for us?
Sure. So let's start with the artificial intimacy piece first, if I may. Those are much more pseudo connections, right? It's like junk food. It's a lot of empty calories. There's no nourishment. There's no depth there. We may feel in the moment like, okay, we can go on, but again, it's likely to happen again, the same kind of upset. And, couples can struggle with the same problematic issue their entire marriage
Mm-hmm.
without really finding a way through and to manage it differently. And so artificial intimacy would have elements of that, the same argument over and over and over again, with it never really being addressed in a way that's satisfactory to both people. We are living right now in a culture, in a world where we have a lot of pseudo connections, whether it's friends on social media. Look, I have thousands of friends. Or in our own in marriage, where we're looking at devices There's less eye contact. There's no flirting or spontaneity. There's a lot of distraction, which I'll say is externally imposed ADD, right?
I like that. Yes.
We're far from the times before our devices were so present when we actually sat down and had face-to-face conversations and didn't have to pull each other's attention, right? When we're on our devices, you actually have to get the other person's attention in order to get that natural eye contact and so on. Think about it, even just when you're in line at the grocery store, everybody's looking down on their phones. There's
Yeah.
no spontaneous interaction with just the stranger next to you.
Right.
And bringing it back to marriage, it's not about being alone physically, but being unheard and misunderstood, let alone distracted. Our culture expects no upsets, no arguments, easy, natural sexual connections in an intimate relationship. And also there's become more of the understanding that in a intimate relationship we should attend to each other's attachment wounds and reparent our spouses in a way so that they feel safe. I have a very different take on that than is out there. I see that as placing our happiness, our contentment, our intimacy in someone else's hands, the external locus of control, right? I expect them to make me feel safe. Now, everyone should be in a safe, loving relationship, not accepting abuse and things like that. I'm not talking about those extreme situations. But I don't want people to give up their agency. Your safety is also within your hands, within your locus of control.
Yes.
So that's painting a picture of artificial intimacy. On the other side of true intimacy is what I was saying before about the intersection of truth and love. That I can speak what is true for me, my perspective, and there is no relationship where there is simply an objective truth. There is always two subjective individuals with their own subjective truth.
Right.
And when we drill down and try and get to an agreement of this is how it was, this is what is so, we perpetuate the conflict and come out of reaching the possibility of reaching true intimacy.
That's good.
I'll pause there for a second because I know I've said a lot.
Yeah, but it's really good because I think we need to see this contrast in order to recognize, first of all, where we are and where we could be headed if we were willing to do some work. And, I was thinking while you were talking there about objective and subjective truth, I heard someone say once, like, well, there are objective truths, like the grass is green, right? And my toddler 4-year-old heard that one time. I was listening to a podcast or something and she heard that phrase and she looks out the window, and I'm in Texas, right? She looks out the window and she says, "Mom, the grass is brown." And I just had to laugh because I thought even sometimes the things that we don't question, that we just think are completely objective, like we all grew up with our picture books telling us the grass is green, but looking out my window right now gives a completely contrary, makes a completely contrary statement. Like it proves that what we think is objective truth wrong. Same thing with the sky is blue, right? Like some days it's not very blue. And so letting go of this idea of like my version of truth is the only version, right? Is really important. into making connections with people, isn't it?
Yes, it's paramount to having truly intimate relationships because the ability to um, set your own perspective aside when you're in conflict with your partner and truly listen to understand and hear their perspective is a skill.
Yes. And to do that, especially without feeling like you are threatened in some way, like your version of
That's
reality
right.
is being threatened. Um, it's a both, sometimes it's a both can be true kind of
Yes,
scenario. And we go into it with this mindset of like it's this or that. Either they're right or I'm right. And that is not always how it works. Sometimes it's both are true. And then we have to figure out how to navigate that, right?
that's right. And, I think the piece that comes up for people a lot with what you just said is there's a little bit of loneliness that we experience when someone doesn't share our perspective. We have to
Mm.
sit with that as, well, it's mine, but it's not hers or it's not his. There's a little bit of loneliness in it. We have to manage that.
That's interesting. I had never considered that before as being loneliness because it feels a little bit isolating. Is that where that comes from? Is it feels like if I'm over here and they're over here, then we're separated in some way.
Yeah.
So then going back to that topic of repair is about that coming back together, right? So tell me a little bit about repair. How, like the process of repair. We know it's different from just, well, I'm sorry, and we're going to kiss and make up, right? So, what does repair look like? Like, what needs to happen after a conflict in order for there to be true repair?
So, most times when there's conflict, we are each in an emotionally heightened state to some degree, where we are, I'll say, more in our reactive brain rather than our wise mind. Okay. And I'm not going to go into detail with that, but the reactive part of us is the part of us that speaks automatically, does what we do automatically. Okay. The wise part of us is able to slow down, take a pause, and have some flexibility, have some perspective, is able to take the other person's perspective, not only their own, right? So, one of the biggest pieces of repair is knowing which part of me is speaking. Am I in my reactive mind or am I in my wise mind?
Hmm.
Okay, so a piece of repair is learning to observe yourself and know which brain state you're in. Now, from there, we want to make sure when you're in a repair conversation, let's say, which I teach people how to do,
Mm-hmm.
you want to make sure it's one wise mind talking to the other wise mind
I like that.
as much as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, part of what I teach is truly a relational mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Think of mindfulness like meditation or things like exercise, right? When you're doing something that is grounding and repetitive and so on. Having a sense of relational mindfulness is a part of the repair process, which is knowing which brain state you're in. But from there, other pieces that are really important is there's one speaker and one listener. It is a repair conversation is not a back and forth of, well, I saw it this way, well, I saw it that way, well, I don't agree with you, and well, you're wrong. Right?
That's still the
That's what we
argument.
know how to do.
Yeah.
That's what we know how to do is back and forth and back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
A repair conversation is a one-way conversation. One
Mm.
person, we're addressing one person's hurt, not both people's.
Interesting. So then after that conversation has happened, then we do it the other way around so that both people
Yes,
are
but there's a caveat, which is
okay.
not one repair conversation on the heels of another repair conversation. You give some space, you give some time.
Oh, that's hard to do because we want it to be fixed like now so we can get back to feeling better.
Well, this is where a bit of the relational mindfulness and the ability to manage our own emotional world is important. I
Mm-hmm.
can tend to my partner's distress and hold on to my own for a period of time, especially when I know my issue will be addressed. It's not going to be forgotten or neglected, or we're never going to come back around to it, right?
Yeah.
Part of having artificial intimacy is we never really get back around to addressing the issue. Sorry may be said, but no one really feels like anything was repaired or that they were heard. In the skills that I teach, part of the repair is is accountability and a commitment to addressing both people's upset, not
Mm.
abandoning one and not coming back around to it. There's a commitment to it, a commitment to return.
Yes. I like that because if you feel worried that your concern or your hurt is never going to be addressed, it's very hard to sit with that and wait, right? But if there is this trust built that we're going to eventually get there, that I matter to you enough that this is going to come back up and we're going to address it, uh, I could see how that really changes the dynamic quite a bit in the relationship. Because so often, I think, and just in listening to you, one of the biggest pieces I feel like we miss so often is that trust of like, I am important enough to you that you're going to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations with me, right? Or that you're going to be willing to bring something back up later, even though you don't have to. Because we do this apology and then we move on thing, and then we're good. Like we don't have to bring up this stuff. We don't have to do the work. We don't have to dig into these uncomfortable conversations. It's like and so we lose that trust in each other.
That's right.
That you're going to hear me, even if it's not right now.
That's right.
So give me some steps. Like, let's talk about some practical steps. If somebody's listening right now and they're like, oh, yeah, we're definitely in that artificial intimacy thing, what are some things, some steps that they can take to start moving more towards healthy intimacy?
Well, a key step is something they can do themselves, whether their partner does it or not. And one of those things is to learn to pause before saying or doing anything when you feel that whoosh come over you of upset. Right? We all know what that whoosh feels like.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. And so, one of the things you can do right away is learn to pause, take a beat, slow down, feel the whoosh. It's telling you something. We want to listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't want to do is what we've always done, which is act on it right away.
That's a big step.
It is a big step. And it's at the
I mean,
foundation of making it better,
well,
changing
and
things
this
in your relationship.
this goes all the way back, like we were talking about, to not often having those childhood skills. Like in my interactions with my 4-year-old, we work on this. Like just because you get angry with your brother doesn't mean you throw the crayons at him. Like
Okay.
it's kind of the same skill, but we're talking about this now in an adult relationship. Like we get angry, we want to throw the crayons. Like we do. So it sounds like part of that is recognizing like this is not, if I act on this feeling that I have, this is not going to be a healthy contribution to this relationship.
Right.
And so I'm going to choose to control my urge in this moment to throw crayons and instead make a healthier choice for my relationship. Is that kind of the right direction?
Absolutely. It's spot on. And how beautiful it is that you are teaching your children this, right? You're modeling it for them, you're teaching it to them as they interact as siblings, but it will serve them in their future relationships as
Well, I
adults.
mean, I just like every parent, I don't always know that they're actually getting it, but we're trying. We
It
still
takes a
throw
lot of
crayons. I'll
repetition.
just, yes, it does. Well, and as a 4-year-old, she lacks the foresight to understand how this is going to affect her relationship or what might happen after she throws the crayons. And hopefully, as adults, we have that perspective to start understanding if we take this action now, though it might not feel good, the benefits are going to serve me. The outcome is going to serve me better in the long run.
That's right. And the reason for that is children don't have a fully developed brain, but adults do.
Hopefully. Yes.
So the reactive part of our brain will always be with us, but we also have that wise part of us to tap into and to strengthen that muscle that knows there's a consequence if I throw those crayons.
Yes. Yes. So, what about the person listening going, if I don't respond in that moment, I am never going to get my opportunity to be heard in this relationship? What would you say to them?
You absolutely need to and should create opportunities to be heard. Taking a pause is not about silencing yourself. I'm actually writing a book about this, about silencing ourselves in relationships and moving out of that.
Mm.
A pause is different from silencing yourself. A pause is I'm going to choose to make my voice heard, my perspective known in a way that is more likely to help my partner come through for me.
Mm. I like that. I like
Because
that.
if we respond as we normally do automatically, we're going to get what we've always gotten.
Yes.
The pause allows you to do something different, and it's not about silencing your voice, such that, I'm going to say it again, you can make it more likely, there's no guarantee, make it
Mm-hmm.
more likely that your spouse will come through for you and that you'll be heard.
Okay. So, what's the next step? We take that
So
pause. We don't respond anger for anger. We don't start throwing crayons. What's the
that's
next
right.
step?
The next step would be to bring it up and say, there's something I'd like to us to iron out, or there's something that bothered me that I'd like us to be able to speak about. Is this a good time? And you ask, is this a good time? Why? Because you want your spouse to be in their wise mind as well.
Mm.
If they're distracted, if they're in the middle of work, if they are upset, it may not be a good time to have the conversation.
Right.
And if you want to set things up for them to be more likely to hear you and to be able to come through for you, You're going to do it at a mutually agreed upon time, which could be 5 minutes from now, or it could be after the kids are in bed. But you agree to a time and then you stick to that time. That's the accountability piece and the commitment piece.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of works two ways, doesn't it? Sticking to that time, because the obvious interpretation of that is we both show up ready to talk at that time, agreed upon time. But there's also this part of like, if we agree that we're going to talk about this after the kids go to bed, then I'm not going to nag and pick at it all day long in preparation for that conversation, right?
That's right. And you bring up a really good point with that because you still may have upset, you still may be bothered by whatever it is you need to have this conversation about. But there's time in between when you get to have that conversation and when you actually initially felt it. And so what do? You regulate your emotions, you manage yourself, and you be nice to each other. You be nice. Pour that cup of coffee you were going to pour. Sit down and have dinner and talk about the day. Share the parenting responsibilities, right? You be nice.
Right.
And
Yes.
the reason we do this, even when you're angry, even when there's something that needs to be discussed, the reason we do this is because you live together. You love the guy. You love the woman. You're in it. You're not above the system that you're living in. You're not below it. You're in it, and what you do affects it.
Yeah. And I would think that if you are kind of carrying that all day and picking at that all day long, like you said earlier, that's also going to negatively affect the chances that they're going to actually hear and respond to you when you do have that conversation. Like it's the classic, shooting yourself in the foot. You're actually lowering your chances that they're going to be able to show up for you the way you need them to.
That's right.
So give us some tips now about that actual conversation. So we
You
sit
got it.
down, we have this thing we need to address. How do we do that in a healthy way?
Yeah. So this is something called the feedback wheel that I teach my clients. And there's one speaker and one listener. So the speaker is going to use 4 particular steps to go through describing what they're upset. I'll give you those 4 steps. While the listener is going to be listening for those 4 steps with the mission of repeating back to the other person what those 4 things were that they heard.
Okay.
Okay. So let me give you those 4 steps as the speaker. The speaker is going to describe what they saw and heard about the situation. So
Okay.
I'm going to make this up as we go along.
Okay.
I was sitting in my office and I heard you come in and the door slam loudly behind you. So as objective as possible, and 1 or 2 sentences is all you get. Not a long, drawn-on description. 2 sentences. Okay?
Okay.
So what I saw and heard. The next part is the story I made up about it,
Yes.
which we know Brene Brown has described before. It's a fabulous tool. It's really important. We all make up things about why something is happening. So in this example, I heard you come in the door and the door slam loudly behind you. What I made up about that was you were angry that you had to go grocery shopping and you were angry with me for it. And the next step is how I felt, not how it made me feel. We own our feelings. We are responsible for our own feelings. No one can make us feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
So take that word, it made me feel, it made me out of it. Okay.
I like that.
It may be
Yes.
subtle, but it's important.
Mm-hmm.
I felt the feeling word that comes up in this example is, I felt angry. So the next step as the speaker is to make a request for the future and make a request right now for what the person can do to help me feel better right now or in the future. So my request would be when you come in, just come to my office and greet me so that I know sort of what state of mind you're in.
Interesting. I like that because we like you said, first of all, we do make up stories, right? And there are 100 reasons why the door might have slammed. It might have been windy and arms were full of groceries and the wind slammed the door shut,
Exactly.
right? But there's something also that you said that I think is really important there is when you ask them to come and check in with you, it's um that connection reestablished, and it's that like we read each other all of the time, like especially as a spouse, like we're constantly aware on some level of the other person's emotional state, and that could solve a whole lot of things if he just poked his head around the corner and said, "Hey honey, I'm home," because she's going to know, right, almost immediately, all kinds of information just from that brief interaction, isn't she?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So, any
Yeah,
other thoughts or last minute kind of tips on this topic of like having these conversations
sure.
with each other?
Yeah. So I gave the example of the speaker's side, but the listener has a job too. And sometimes the listener's side is the more difficult side.
Because you have to not defend yourself, right?
That's right. You're not listening to prove your point, to prove your perspective, to be right, or any of those
Mm,
things. You're listening in order to help the other person feel better. As the listener, it is your job to put your perspective to the side for the moment and tend to them.
mm,
So you're going to repeat back what you understood them to be saying. So in this example, it's so when I came in the door, you heard the door slam loudly behind me. The story you made up was that I was angry with you for me having to go out and get the groceries. And you felt angry. And what you're asking of me is that when I come home, just poke my head in the door when you're in the office and greet you so that you know what's going on for me. Am I getting that right? And that's key. You ask the other person, am I getting that right? And they are free to say yes or no, or, yeah, but you missed this little piece. Okay, so fill
mm-hmm.
in the blank. What's the piece that I missed? Repeat that piece back. And then here's the next step, and that really important step. The request that is made. As much as possible, you're going to be giving. Yeah, I can do that for you. Sure, no problem. Why? Because it's in your best interest to come through for your partner, to
Right.
actually create repair. Now, obviously, if they're asking for something that is out of your integrity or is so, just beyond what you could possibly do, you can always say, no, I can't do that. But what
Mm-hmm.
I want you to look for as the listener is how much can I actually come through for you, want to come through for the other person.
Yeah. How close can I get at least to what you're asking for? And it's really simple when you break it down that way because it's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about caring for each other. And that in itself is a huge deal when you can get to that place of this isn't about whether I'm right or wrong,
That's right.
isn't it? Like
When
that's a
we're in
big,
right or Yeah, when we're in right or wrong thinking, who's right or who's wrong, we're in individual thinking. It's all about me. It's about I. And what this is shifting us to is a we thinking, which
yes.
we need a lot more of in this world, is we
Yeah.
thinking.
And we absolutely need it if we're going to develop this true intimacy in a relationship. I mean, I think if we could summarize this whole conversation in one, boil it down to one thing, a lot of it comes down to that shift from I thinking to we thinking, doesn't it?
Yes. And the other thing is to
Yes.
have support around doing this, right? We don't have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of support to do this.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes, you might be in a place where you're like, well, our marriage isn't that bad. We don't need counseling. But sometimes sitting down with someone and learning these skills can be the thing that keeps you from going to that place where then things are so bad, there's a big crisis to solve.
That's right.
If we can develop these skills before there's a big relationship crisis, so much easier and so much better, right? Like, I assume as a counselor, you would prefer to spend your time teaching these skills to relatively healthy couples than you would trying to rescue relationships that are on the verge of ending. Is that a good assumption?
Absolutely. If I could, bottle and sell prevention, that would be fabulous. People wait an average of 6 years beyond when problems start to seek any help. We wouldn't do that with any other illness, right? If we think about it from a health perspective, we wouldn't do that with heart problems or you find a lump in your breast. You don't wait 6 years to go to the doctor.
No, that's a good point. We really don't. Why is that? Why do we do that?
Well, I think there's been a lot of stigma around this. Remember at the beginning of our conversation, we were saying we expect these things to come naturally and that we shouldn't need to learn skills. We all grew up in a family, we all have seen relationships, we all know how to do this. Well, we don't know how to do it well.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so we're almost out of time, but Risa, I would love for you to tell us where people can go to connect with you. And you mentioned that you have a quiz available on your website that could be helpful for some people. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So there is a quiz on my website, which is togethercouplescounseling.com. And I believe there'll be a link to that in the show notes or
Yes,
somewhere or
we
something
will.
in this
Yes, we'll put a
podcast
link.
world and how all that works.
We'll put links, all of your links in the show notes, your social media, as well as your website and this quiz. But tell us a little bit about what the quiz is designed to do.
Yeah, the quiz is designed to help you assess what type of conflict style you have. What's your go-to when you get into conflict with your spouse? And there are 5 primary ways that we do conflict. I'm sorry, 4 primary ways that we do conflict. And this will help you assess that and give you a good feedback about that for yourself so that you can focus on ways to change it.
Excellent. So tell us how people who live in your area can connect with you and
Sure.
get some
Yeah,
counseling from you, or you mentioned that you have an event coming up. So tell us about that as
I
well.
do. So I mentioned that I'm in Maryland. People fly in from across the country to see me. So if anyone has the means to do that, you're welcome to. I see clients in my office for 2-day couples intensives, which is where people tend to fly in from. And of course, I do weekly couples therapy for those who are more local, online or in my office. And I am also hosting an in-person relationship boot camp in Annapolis, Maryland, October 19th and 20th. Annapolis is just a beautiful, charming, historic waterfront town, the perfect place to come for a weekend or an extended weekend and build the relationship skills to make your relationship more truly intimate and to reduce conflict. All of the information is on my website under the tab Relationship Bootcamp. Uh, Registration for that opens August 1st, so that's just a couple of days away. And we do those about twice a year, so if you don't get in on this one, you're going to have to wait till 2025. Uh, but connect with me and stay in touch, and I'll be happy to share with you when the next one will be if you don't make it into this one. The seating is limited. We keep it to 24 people because we want it to be an intimate group, my co-presenter and I, just so you're aware.
Well, if you're listening and you have identified with what Risa has been telling us and you would like to connect with her, please do that. All of her information will be in the show notes, her website where you can find that quiz and how to register for this upcoming event. So thank you so much for being with us. It's been a fabulous conversation and I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me, Alyssa. It's really wonderful to talk to you and the wonderful work that you are doing for your audience.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Equilibrium Echoes. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit www.coachingwithalyssa.com/podcast. And while you're there, book your free consultation and download the preview of my new book, Marriage is Hard and Other Lies I Believed. I'll see you in the next episode.